following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners on Saga 960 AM and those listening around the world on streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for practical advice for everyday problems, using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This episode, we're talking toxic positivity, the belief that no matter how dire or difficult a situation is, people should maintain a positive mindset. At first, this might seem great. Good vibes, right? But have you ever been around a person who looks on the bright side to the point of being delusional? They're depressing to be around. Their need to stay up brings everyone else around them down. That's why it's toxic behavior. It's also not good for the person themselves. There's a reason one of my top 10 phrases is, ignoring negatives isn't being positive. If you don't acknowledge the bad, you can't do better. It isn't healthy to find the good in everything. Sometimes there just is no bright side, and it's better to accept that so you can make changes. Now, I want to be clear. There's nothing wrong with putting the best possible realistic spin on things. Toxic positivity is about denying any emotion that might be inconvenient or unpleasant. No one likes feeling angry, scared, or sad, but it is possible to be better at feeling those emotions. How do we do that? By actually feeling our feelings and learning how to process them. Now, my guest tonight is psychologist Dr. Loren Soeiro, who's going to give us some suggestions to avoid toxic positivity. But first, I want to deal with that feeling your feelings thing, because I'm not going to take away someone's positives without giving you something to replace it with. Now, there are certain phrases that therapists like to use that can drive clients ironically insane, and feeling your feelings is one of those phrases. I've been there. I get it. Many of us develop emotional processes out of necessity early in life. Those processes get us so far. But then we discover they're not enough, or that we want better. And those changes can be, well, the process sucks. There are times we all have to do the proverbial suck it up, buttercup, and that sort of fortitude is a great skill to build. But even the toughest person can only carry around so much emotional baggage. Learn from my mistakes. There's a big difference between recognizing you'll have to wait to feel bad about something and denying you feel bad about it at all. We all know that person who denies feeling things, and instead of dealing with them directly, they nag, they criticize, or they even become destructive or violent. Now, obviously, violence is bad, but nagging and criticizing are bad too. And that's what toxic positivity is. It's sugar-coated nagging and criticizing. It's a demand that other people avoid talking about challenging emotional content because the toxic person just can't handle any bumps in the road. Many of our toxically positive habits get passed down through families. Yes, the old family of origin thing. If you've seen any of those 1950s or 60s ads, you can see that toxic positivity was a big part of the high wire act that post-war society tried to pull off. That whole cheer up, friend, don't be a Debbie Downer routine. Well, it wasn't designed to make anyone actually feel better. It was designed to get people to shut up because multiple generations of men were coming back from war completely traumatized. Various powers that beed, is that a thing? It is now. Hoped that a completely stable environment that the men were coming back from war into would solve the problem of what was then called shell shock, what we know now is post-traumatic stress. And of course, this artificially happy, stable environment didn't actually solve the problem. And in part, that was because that artificially stable environment was artificial and therefore unsustainable. So while that turn that frown upside down attitude still lingers in some places, that lifestyle where you could afford a detached house and a car and a single income household that only required a high school education, well, that lifestyle is gone. Now, even back in the 50s, the rosy picture of middle-class life we see through media from the time was, well, it was fiction. Even if you watch a show like The Honeymooners, which was considered newly raw and edgy, whenever Ralph says, "To the moon, Alice," that's saying he's gonna smack her. Yeah, a beloved 1950s TV character's tagline was making light of domestic violence. You can use things like that to peer into what was actually going on behind the song and dance routine. Through the 50s and into the 60s, a lot of people were avoiding feeling their feelings. It was a badge of pride to avoid feeling your feelings in some corners. And it led to intergenerational alcoholism, parents who were ticking time bombs, and entire families who tiptoed around one or more very broken people who had absolutely no ability to deal with any unpleasant things. Of course, the concept of peacetime after the World Wars was also a misnomer. And while we're right to be proud of Canada's welcoming attitude towards refugees, the people fleeing war up until this day aren't being provided with services to help them process their trauma. So this cycle of trauma keeps repeating itself. So there are a lot of people habitually denying their feelings because they're terrified that if they do, they'll fall apart. Here's the real deal. You can only deny your feelings for so long before you start feeling the health consequences. Learn from my mistakes. Yeah, sometimes being tough crosses over into being stupid and self-destructive. Now, a lot of you right now are probably starting to feel nervous and you're thinking, just tell me what I'm supposed to do. This is tough stuff, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people find the honest answer frustrating. The honest answer is, you gotta slow down so that you don't crash. And this is where I get, but I can't slow down. I have to work. I have responsibilities. I have school. I have work, bills to pay. I hear ya. But this stuff is the emotional equivalent of driving in bad weather. If you don't slow down and react to the conditions you're going through, you're gonna crash. Here's all I'm asking for you to start. It's not much. 5 minutes a day. That's it. 5 minutes a day. And it can be any time of the day you want. Personally, I find right before I go to sleep the most reliable time. But whenever, in the morning, at lunch, go to the bathroom and hide. I did that at work sometimes. Take 5 minutes and ask yourself, how am I doing? Really? And answer honestly. No one needs to know but you. How are you doing? Really? And it is absolutely okay to not be okay. The goal here is to just accept what you're feeling. I know. How do you do that? How do you accept the bad feelings? This is where things get a little counterintuitive, a lot counterintuitive. You can develop the skill to be okay with not feeling okay. What? Yeah. Like I said, counterintuitive. I'll try to explain. Human brains are really good at short-term warning bells designed to keep us alive. Our bodies have all these extra chemicals that kick in when it's time to fight or flight. And because of this, the last thing we want when it comes to our feelings is to train our brains to treat perfectly healthy emotions like threats. That's why it's really important to not fight our feelings, because the more we fight those feelings, the more our brains sort the feelings we fight into the bad things, run away, or fight it column. And we get more of those extra chemicals kicking in, telling us to fight or flight. And it just cycles and cycles and escalates and escalates. And that's why it feels so overwhelming. Now, this is not an invitation to have zero impulse control. Quite the opposite. The purpose of this exercise is to feel your feelings, not act on them. The entire purpose of this is you're not doing anything about this right now. You figure out what's going on before you decide your course of action. We're trying to not be reactive. So take deep breaths. Identify that feeling. Name it. It doesn't have to be a name that makes sense to anybody but you. Hi, feeling. How are you? Nice to meet you, feeling. I might be actually looking at you for the first time because you're not my favorite feeling in the world. Yeah, this is where things are getting weird. The interesting thing is some people who do this exercise have trouble feeling good. They feel guilty or scared because it might go away, it won't last, I must be missing something because, oh God, I'm not, remember what I said? You train yourself to feel like feelings are fights, right? Other people are terrified of anything unpleasant or painful. They don't know if they can handle unpleasant or painful, especially painful. And they don't want to fall apart, break down, or explode. And they have very good reasons for this fear. That feeling, that being afraid of being afraid, or being afraid of feeling sad, right? The fear of overwhelm can in itself be so overwhelming that we get that feedback loop again and things become impossible to process. And this is the learned skill part of feeling your feelings. You've been trained to do that if you do it. There is a better, more comfortable way. Now, what this ramp up is often connected to is something called catastrophizing, or focusing on the worst possible thing that could happen. Sometimes the worst impossible thing that could happen. We've all catastrophized at some point, especially when we were teenagers. Hopefully, as we get older, we learn from trial and error, the examples of other people. Maybe we get interventions like this show. And we learn how to feel like feeling bad isn't the end of the world. We learn to feel that feeling bad is the beginning of something better. Now, obviously, if we have a toxically positive parent or multiple toxically positive influences, that's difficult or impossible to do, but you can still learn. I go through this with clients all the time, and the results don't take that long. So don't get discouraged. Oh, that was toxically positive. Get discouraged if you want to, but pick yourself back up and do it again. Now, some people find it easier to do this next part with another person they trust, but I'm way too much of an introvert for that. I do this on my own. Get the other person or that inner voice to tell you that that bad feeling that you're sitting with, it'll pass. It'll go away. It's temporary. It may not feel like it at the moment. It may feel overwhelming and forever, but it's not. It's temporary. That's what our systems are designed to do. If we don't fight the process, we feel the bad feeling, we process the bad feeling dissipates. Tell yourself that. Get someone you love to tell you that. And take some more deep breaths. Slow it down. Drive through that bad weather without crashing. You see what I mean? You don't have to do anything about the feeling or the things connected to it. You just have to feel it. 5 minutes a day with this. That's it. Now, obviously, this is the beginner course, but as you get into more advanced stuff of this sort, the feeling your feelings and not catastrophizing, so on and so forth, the fundamentals really don't change. We just basically level up, take on, more difficult feelings, build one brick at a time in the road to actually living our lives. You can't live your life if you don't feel your feelings, right? We're going to bring in an expert after the break to talk about this. We're going to talk to Dr. Loren Soeiro on his take on toxic positivity. He's written about this. He's actually a therapist. Sometimes another person can say things like this in a way that clicks differently. So the more the merrier this episode. And also, like I said, he's a therapist. I'm not. Be back after the break. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. And it's time once again for the It's Not Therapy interview. Tonight, I'm talking to Dr. Loren Soeiro. Pardon me, off to a great start. Loren Soeiro. He is a psychologist working with adults and couples in private practice in New York City. And I discovered one of Loren's articles on Psychology Today about toxic positivity. Dr. Soeiro, I'm very, very happy to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right, so let's start real basic. What is toxic positivity?
Okay, toxic positivity isn't just trying to be positive. It is putting on a kind of an artificially positive facade and rejecting any hint of negative emotions. It's kind of a form of emotional suppression, and it comes from discomfort, from not feeling like you could handle hearing something serious or sad or anxiety-provoking from another person. It may be well-intentioned. A lot of people do this because they hope to put other people at ease, but when they go too far, when they take it to an unhealthy extreme, this kind of positive thinking is not good for you.
Now, this is the breakdown in logic I struggle with toxic positivity, because you're right. It is well-intentioned. They want to put people at ease, but they themselves aren't actually processing emotions. They are, like you said, avoiding it. So why do they think that something's going to help someone else when it's not working for them?
Well, toxic positivity is kind of bad in two ways. It's bad for yourself and it's bad for other people. It's bad for your relationships. You may be hoping for the best, hoping that directing a conversation along the simplest path is the best way to keep things light, which maybe will help the other person avoid wallowing in how they're feeling. Unfortunately, it's not really how it works. While you're reaching for a way to reassure the other person and you're saying things like, well, everything happens for a reason, or don't worry, be happy, just think positive, it is what it is, that person may have been reaching out to you or to be heard, for you to understand what they're going through, even just a little bit. And what you're doing is sort of rejecting them. You're basically saying, those bad feelings are not okay with me. I'm going to need you to be artificial with me. I'm going to need you to be just hold the party line.
Right. The use of the word rejection is interesting. I used minimizing, but you're right. It actually is a rejection. It's telling somebody, I don't want to hear this. Let's move on, isn't it?
Yeah. It may even come from, like I said, being artificially positive with yourself
Mm-hmm.
is creating a sort of an artificial emotional world inside yourself. And that attracts artificiality and superficiality from other people. And it results in more superficial relationships.
Yeah. Now, I talk a lot about being the hero of your own story. And to me, acknowledging pain, acknowledging the bad parts is a big part of that. You don't want to cheer a hero on if everything's simple and easy for them, right?
Yeah.
How do you put it in a more, normie terminology? Why is it important to acknowledge not only your own pain, but the pain of other people?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, it could prevent you from growing if learning from your negative experiences. If you ignore them, fail to process them, just kind of try and stuff them down the memory hole and move on without really feeling what you felt. I mean, one thing I would say is that grief from losses of all kinds, I think really the only way to get over grief is to go through it, to feel those feelings, and to come out the other side so that you know that the loss will be with you, but that those deepest moments of grief, sadness, feeling, that those will have passed.
Yeah. Now, thanks to She-Hulk, the Disney Plus show, we've heard a lot about dialectical behavior therapy now, and distress tolerance is a big part of dialectical behavior therapy. Now, your article says that people who are toxically positive do not have the ability to sit with their feelings. They have low distress tolerance. So if somebody recognizes that in themselves, they go, gee, that's describing me. How does somebody build that skill?
Well, how do you build the skill? It's a good question. I think it would start with catching the signs that you're not able to tolerate it. I mean, if you feel guilty about having negative emotions, right? If you feel like you have the obligation to hide your feelings behind feel-good quotes, to keep other people comfortable, if you are trying to be stoic, if you believe that it's important to ignore your problems instead of facing them, you may want to look at this. This might add up to a low distress tolerance.
Yeah, and it can cause health problems down the road, like physical health problems, packing all this stuff down, can it?
That is true. Studies have shown, there have been some studies about asking one group of participants to watch a sort of disturbing medical procedure on film and asking them to suppress their emotions, and having another group watch the same film while just feeling whatever they feel. The first group, the people asked to suppress their emotions, well, they had a lot more physiological arousal than the other group. In other words, they were just churning on the inside twice as much as the group that were allowed to feel whatever those films made them feel.
Yeah, as people may think that's counterintuitive, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you sort of look into how emotions work. And what's an example of being truly positive as opposed to false positive or toxically positive? What is feeling a bad feeling, but being productive about it as opposed to just trying to ignore it?
I think that acknowledging when something sucks is okay. But I think there's a big difference between this sucks and this is an absolute disaster, unrecoverable, life-changing event. I mean, this leans a little bit more on cognitive behavioral therapy, but sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between something that makes you feel bad right now and something that's actually going to have long-term repercussions. So, sometimes it's okay to tell yourself, you know what, today sucked. I had a bad experience with my boss. But, there's a difference between something that's going to get you a dirty look, something that'll get you a talking to, and something that'll get you fired. And today was not a day that'll get me fired.
Yeah, I had a day last week. I said Tuesday started on the Monday, and 2 hours into Tuesday, it was a day I'd just get through. It was just one of those days, and I wasn't going, oh, everything's rainbows, right? Because that can cause you to make mistakes. It can cause you to ignore stimulus, but it's like the goal, just get through the day, restart. Tuesday's Tuesday, Wednesday's Wednesday. Okay. And you know what? It worked. It just sort of reset and got through it.
We all have days like that.
Yeah, we sure do. So how does someone become more truly positive, especially when they have people around them who do this toxic positivity? I grew up in a household where it was all don't be negative, which I am aware is in itself a negative statement. But that I remember as a kid going, how do you expect me to just not acknowledge this bad thing?
Mhm.
Right? What does true positive thinking look like?
I think it's about being realistic,
Okay.
being fair to yourself about what you should, quote, should feel about something. Don't judge yourself for having negative feelings.
Hmm.
Feelings are signals. We all have them. They can provide to you a lot of information. And it's important to understand what information these feelings are conveying. Also, here's a big buzzword, but you should prioritize self-care. There are times when you may have been through something incredibly distressing. And at those times, it's important to acknowledge it, to seek appropriate help, and to take care of yourself as you need it. In terms of in conversation, if you're talking to somebody who tells you happiness is a choice, for instance, and I would say that can be one of the most damaging, because it can make another person feel guilty or ashamed for trying to be open with you. But if you have that experience and somebody says a kind of a flat affirmation to you, I think it's fair to explain what you need from your conversation partner, to let them know that you just like to vent for a while, and to ask them just to listen. You don't necessarily need a solution to the problem.
When someone's venting, it can be difficult to know what to say, because you don't want to just be sure, yeah, that's awful. You want to engage. But what are some safe things to say that aren't look on the bright side? Or, I don't know why anybody would say happiness is a choice when someone is going through a bad time where they're clearly sad. But that's one I will watch, because I have said that to people. What do you say when someone is just talking about a bad experience, and you want it to be clear that you're engaged, you're listening, but you don't want to gaslight their experience?
Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes it's fair to let them know that it's hard to know what to say, but that you can understand how difficult it must have been for them to go through that. That you're here for them. That you want to hear about it, and you want them to have a chance to talk about it if that helps. And you can offer your help. You can offer your sincere help, even if you don't really know what kind of help that person might need.
Yeah, I've had situations lately where it's like, what do you need? What do you need from me? And they say, I don't know. And then it's sort of like, okay, I need to redirect here. But what do you suggest when someone is just that stuck and they don't really know what they want, but they're in a precarious place?
Mm-hmm. I would say suggest something neutral. Of course, it depends on your relationship with that person, but offering to spend a little time, to go for a walk, just to talk on the phone, depending on where this person is in your life, you may want to sit down with them and watch a movie. You might want to play video games. You might want to go to the gym or play tennis, or just something that helps them pass the next few hours with somebody that they know cares about them.
Okay. So just being there is sometimes enough?
Being present is important.
Now, you said something a while back, and I realized people probably, this is one of these things we say a lot in mental health circles, but maybe people don't know what it means. You said, don't judge yourself for negative feelings.
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like to somebody who's going, I don't know what that means?
I think that some people are afraid to acknowledge their own unhappiness. If they have an argument with somebody, they may be afraid that argument will have serious consequences for a relationship. It may not, but if it made you feel bad, you can learn something about yourself and about what's going on in that relationship if you pay attention to those feelings. What was it that they said that bothered you a little bit? And what does that bring up? What does it make you think of? What does it remind you of? And by following that thought process, you may learn a little something about yourself and about how you're relating to that person.
Now, final question, and it's a big one because it's about owning your mistakes and doing better. What if somebody's listening to this and realized, oh, I've said these things, I've done these things, I've been a toxically positive person. How do I fix it? What do I do?
Honestly, I'm sure we've all said and done these things because of anxiety and discomfort. It makes us reach for the easiest way out of the moment. What do you do? Slow down and try and listen to how other people are feeling. Try to find empathy. There are things you can do to build your empathy for other people, but imagine if somebody is asking themselves if they've ever done that, then they probably are a naturally empathic person who just had a bad moment or two. I'd say be compassionate to yourself and ask yourself how you could do better next time.
Yeah. Any tips for very empathic people avoiding that overload that can cause you to sort of want to run away?
Well, I think avoiding the overload, you may need to work through moments like that to recognize that feeling overloaded in a conversation or by emotion is not necessarily as overwhelming as you think it is. I mean, the other person that perhaps you're afraid of expressing how you feel in front of them, they may be much less uncomfortable than you. They may not understand what you're going through. They may not notice the discomfort at all. I'm a big believer in self-care, and I'm also a big believer in being open and vulnerable with the people that you care about. I mean, that is how to build intimacy, and it's how to build strong relationships. So sometimes just admitting that you feel overwhelmed can be good for you and for the relationship you're building.
That's really great advice to keep in mind that the other person's not as awkward with it as you are in a lot of cases. Loren Soeiro, Dr. Loren Soeiro, private practice, New York City. I found him on Psychology Today. You guys can too. Loren, thanks so much for joining us on It's Not Therapy.
Well, it's really fun talking to you. Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to pick up where we left off with Loren. How to avoid getting overwhelmed when you're dealing with things that suck. If you have a question about dealing with overwhelm, give me a call, 289-275-9600. That's 289-275-9600. Or you can email me. I prefer email because I can slow it down and savor every word. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Lian as in Nancy A at nottherapyshow.com. Or you can send me a message. I love Twitter. I deal with Instagram at Not Therapy Show on both those services. Back in a few. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. The whole theme of this episode is if you never take a good look at the negatives you encounter, things likely won't get better on their own. And you might actually just be digging a hole of delusion deeper. But how do we look at the negatives without getting depressed or discouraged? And that's where the stories we tell ourselves come in. Making the unhappy moments seem less big. It's all about balance. It's all about what we call, the technical term is emotional regulation. And if you're somebody who's been through therapy, you've probably heard the terms emotional regulation and emotional dysregulation enough times to make you want to throw up. It's another one of those things therapists say without really breaking it down. Sometimes when people get really comfortable in something, they think everybody knows what the word means the same way they do. We all do that to an extent. Communication is more of an art than science, but how does emotional regulation work? How do we avoid getting overwhelmed by the bad things that happen to other people? Well, fortunately for everyone here, I kind of do this for a living. Empathy does mean that when someone you love hurts, you hurt too. But it shouldn't hurt so much that you feel the need to shut it down or run away. Again, there are a few reasons why people do this, and we know it's not good, but, well, we've all done it at times. It's about mindset, expectations, and often trying to fix things for the other person instead of letting them stand on their own. You could be overwhelmed with your own stuff when trying to help somebody else through a bad time. And if that's so, it's better to commiserate with each other and share than shut the other person down because you're feeling at the end of your rope. Don't think of it as having to be strong for them. Think of it as being there for each other. Make sure you're not thinking about the other person like they're weak or a child. You could also just feel helpless to help the other person. Remember that being there for them is helping. They may not want you to do more than that. That's why I say, top 10 phrase, be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. When your friend's going through a bad time, you're the sidekick in your friend's story. It's their bad time. So act accordingly. And then there's the possibility that, well, a person could just be walking drama and you're tired of it. We all know people who just swing from one crisis to another, and that's draining. But, another top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. If this person is that dramatic, maybe they shouldn't have so much access to you. Maybe you shouldn't be the default person they lean on. If you want to have them around, or, you have to, a simple, I'm sorry you're going through that, is enough. If you start playing that passive-aggressive game of toxic positivity, that lessens you because you're sniping with false positives. And that means the dramatic person is drawing you into their drama. Either say as little as possible or get distance. Don't fall into that. And I get this one a lot, but it's real easy to say that something wouldn't bother you if someone said it to you. But different things bother different people, so that's frankly irrelevant. If you're saying something unnecessary that hurts someone, you're being a bad friend. The entire reason I'm talking about toxic positivity is that it's usually well-meaning. This is one of those situations where intents aren't the problem. Distress tolerance is. And that sounds counterintuitive because, wait, you're trying to get away from distress. That's not really good intentions. But so many people don't do that deliberately. It's all subconscious or panic. And so people think they have good intents. The results are anything but good. And absolutely none of this stuff about toxic positivity means that you can't tell yourself things that might bother someone else, but actually makes you feel better if it gets you through a bad time. However, it's good to check in every so often and see if your self-talk is actually self-care, or if you could improve your self-compassion and not need to just get through it quite so often. If you find yourself frequently overwhelmed by others going through a bad time, that could be a sign of trauma. You might have to start listening to your own inner voice better and maybe seek therapy for that trauma. Or you can always talk to me about what's bothering you. You can give me a call at 289-275-9600. That's 289-275-9600. Or Liana at nottherapyshow.com. That's Liana at nottherapyshow.com. You can reach out to me at that email if you're looking for a private one-on-one session as well. Or Twitter, Instagram, Not Therapy Show. That's at Not Therapy Show. We got to go to one more break. After our last break, how to recognize when you're being positive in a toxic way. Probably good to provide more examples of that one. We'll be back in a bit. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I am Liana Kersner. I am not a therapist, and we are talking toxic positivity. Now, I went real gentle on this show because it's about positives that aren't being positive, and that can be really hard to hear. It's something you're doing with the best of intentions, and it might be causing harm, and that can really freak people out. But don't worry. There are a few ways to make it easier to tell whether you're being the kind of positive that's actually positive or if you're just avoiding the issue. First, are you saying something that's actually helpful? An example from my own life the last couple of weeks. I've got some friends who are being bullied by online trolls right now, and it's really tempting to say, don't let the trolls get to you. But my friends are already upset. The trolls have already gotten to them. So all that statement would do is make my friends feel worse because now not only are the bullies upsetting them, but they've somehow failed by letting them upset them. And there's nothing we can do about them being upset now. See how that works? Would have been well-meaning, would have been wrong. Secondly, are you coming across as telling another person how they should feel? We've talked before about how anger is a really commonly shamed emotion, but so is sadness, so is fear. We see that cliche in media all the time of someone telling an upset person not to cry when that upset person is already crying. Telling them not to cry is pretty pointless. Now, caveat on this one. This isn't the same as setting boundaries on behavior. Just because someone's angry doesn't mean they have the right to say, smash your stuff or scream at you, as opposed to just yelling at the situation. And they certainly don't have the right to call you names or criticize you just because they're upset. If you find yourself in that spot of being in the receiving end of anger that isn't about you, you can validate the feelings, but not the behavior. You can say something like, you have every right to be angry right now, but look, if you call me names again, I'm going to have to walk away until you calm down. Boundaries don't go away just because someone's going through a bad time. You know what I say, top 10 phrase, people don't have to like your boundaries. They do have to respect them. They have to respect them all the time. Third, are you making another person's feelings about anybody other than them? That's that old, what would dad think if he saw you crying deal said at said father's funeral. I don't know if anybody's seen this. It's like, if dad were still around, well, he's not. Who cares what he think? He's dead. He's not there. I'm being harsh right now, but what are you really trying to say with that? You're invoking a ghost because you want the person to stop crying because you're having trouble with it. And that may be, not intentional, but it's certainly not cool. Fourthly, are you rushing another person to act? That old, there are other fish in the sea, get back out there thing after a breakup, that get back out there thing after anything, frankly. Here's the thing about that. The person may not want to quite yet. They may not be ready quite yet. And that's totally healthy because it's their life, not yours. And you can mean absolutely well with that. But if you're doing the rah, tough love pep talk and you see the other person getting agitated, back off. Not your place. And my final tip for this. Are you sounding like a fortune cookie? What? No. Everything does not happen for a reason. There is no destiny with this stuff. And saying everything happens for a reason can make a person feel punished. Bad things are happening to them for a reason. What did they do wrong? Right? Now, this gets a little dicey in religious communities because some people are comforted by the idea that there's this guiding hand in the universe. But rule of thumb, unless you know for sure, it's better to let the upset person bring this bit of metaphysics up themselves rather than you offering it. So what are some positive things that you can say? Well, the safest thing is to ask someone what they need or if anything will help. What can you do? You can tell them that it's okay to feel sad or angry or whatever they're feeling. That can mean a lot. Asking questions as opposed to making statements encourages conversation. And you want to focus on them as a person rather than the bigger picture. That's usually the best way to go because it keeps things smaller and more manageable for everyone involved. If someone expresses regrets, if they say they made a mistake, let them have that. Hopefully it's true. If people are blaming themselves for things that couldn't have been their fault, they might be struggling for control of the situation, and that's a very valid impulse. Now, you shouldn't feed the false thing. You shouldn't let people blame themselves for things that aren't their fault. But right then, right at that moment, might not be the time to have that conversation. You absolutely do not have to agree, however, that something was their fault that couldn't possibly have been. You can say something like, I'm sure it feels that way right now, because it does. Stick a pin in it, come back to it later. And as if on cue, we are out of time this episode, so I'm going to have to stick a pin in that thought. Lots more to talk about on this stuff. Interpersonal communication is a tough one. We all make mistakes. I want to stress that. We all make mistakes, and a great way to get overwhelmed is to worry about being perfect about this or being terrified of messing up. There is a way to make mistakes properly. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. I'm still trying to figure out what the topic is for next week. But yeah, if you put your foot in your mouth, apologize, learn from it, try not to do it again. That's all anybody can ask. Yeah, so if you want to ask me a question about next week, since you can still influence what I talk about next week, 289-275-9600. That's 289-275-9600. Or email me, preferred, especially if you want a one-on-one session, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Liana, N as in Nancy, A at nottherapyshow.com. Or Twitter, Instagram, Not Therapy Show. Twitter, Instagram, Not Therapy Show. And that's it. That's my time. Remember, I'm Liana Kersner. I am not a therapist, and your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Bye for now.